So I want to open by telling you a little bit about the Humanitarian Innovation Project. What are its origins? Why was it created? What's its purpose? There's been a very welcome humanitarian innovation turn in many organizations. UNHCR has been pioneering in creating UNHCR innovation. UNICEF has developed innovation labs in countries like Kosovo, here in Uganda, in Burundi. We're taking a different view of what we mean by innovation, to capture the skills, talent, aspirations, entrepreneurialism, and creativity of refugee populations themselves, and then to seek to create an enabling environment that supports that initiative from the bottom up. During the course of the day, you're going to hear many examples of innovation by refugees themselves, very inspiring examples that, in spite of many constraints, are taking place and are in need of a better enabling environment and more support. Just to very briefly touch upon these, the top left-hand slide illustrates the creation of a bicycle that's been converted to be able to sharpen tools by a Congolese entrepreneur in Kyangwali. And the top right-hand corner, in the Nakivale settlement, a young Congolese entrepreneur has created a business, an electronics business, that has led to the creation of a radio station and in turn a media company that's trying to provide documentary films.
Kyangwali refugee settlement was founded by the Ugandan government in 1998. And it is located in Hoima district near the border of DRC. And the size of the settlement is about 90 square kilometers. And it is divided into 14 administrative villages. And I'd like to show you this GIS mapping to locate where it is. Thank you. And currently, Kyangwali refugee settlement is hosting about 21,000 refugees. And actually 85% of them are Congolese refugees. See, the settlement is endowed with a large fertile agricultural land. And actually refugees are given by OPM a certain plot of land where they can build their own houses, and also they can use the space for their own farming, for their own self-consumption and sales of their agricultural crops. I just want to show you a kind of list of different types of economic activities here. I'm not going to go through this whole list right now. But in addition to like farming and also livestock, there are significant amount of like non-farming economic activities inside a settlement.
Just carrying on to our second site, Nakivale. What we're seeing here is an increase in scale and complexity from Kyangwali, and as such what we feel is a fascinating point of comparison. As now just described, Kyangwali provides ample evidence of diversity in livelihoods, of network, complexity in which refugees engage with the private sector, as well as refugees' nestedness in the Ugandan host state economy. And we see again all of this nuance in Nakivale, except that as a settlement roughly 3 times Kyangwali's size, we see it at a larger scale. And that's not just scale, but also diversity in nationality. Kyangwali has 2 predominant nationalities, Congolese and South Sudanese. Nakivale has multiple nationalities, including Congolese, Somali, Rwandan, Burundian, Eritrean, and others. And this diversity leads to greater social complexity in refugees' engagement with the internal and external private markets. So let me quickly run through some of the broader observations we've gathered in Nakivale over the last several months. It's a relatively old settlement. It was founded in 1959. It currently hosts 62,000 registered refugees, about half of which are Congolese, but also Somali and Rwandan. And it's located in the Sinjiro district, southern Uganda, near the Tanzania border. So let me give you a very quick kind of field trip to Ntakamaze. We are here in Kampala, the very well air-conditioned Serena Hotel. Nakivale is about a 6 hours drive away and is quite simply massive. It's about 100 square kilometers. It's so large, it's actually divided into 3 zones: Rabondo zone, Base Camp zone, and Juro zone. Now these are each zone, in essence, a internal economy. Now let's go to Kampala. As of 2012, more than 50,000 refugees have come to Kampala, despite receiving very little direct support from refugee assistance agencies compared to the settlement. The refugee populations are scattered throughout the city's low-income areas, often concentrating around the same country of origin. For instance, Somali refugees in Kiseni, Congolese refugees in Katwe in Zambia, and Ethiopian refugees in Kabalagala. Other communities, however, are very scattered, particularly the Rwandans and the Eritreans. And they form a relatively tiny fraction of the city's total workforce. All of this means we've come to think of Kampala as perhaps the highest order of diversity and complexity of social networks among refugee livelihoods throughout our 3 sites. But it's also an incredibly rich environment for examples of refugees' integration and nestedness into the existing Ugandan market, because indeed, unlike the settlements, refugees pursue few, if any, agricultural livelihoods within the city boundaries. The Somali oil and automotive services sector. It's a different level of scale, and here we're indebted to the efforts of the Somali Youth Development Project for helping us with this information. There are about 10 major oil companies and gas station chains in Kampala alone, which are owned by the Somali Ugandans, Somali Kenyans, other Somali diaspora. These companies bring oil into Uganda, and several of them run franchise businesses around the automotive sector, such as tire repair, used automotive parts, and service stations which sell food and snacks. The tour of the Somali oil sector, it's again a very global example. The Somali oil companies, let's take City Oil, the largest oil supplier in Kampala. City Oil buys directly from Dubai and Saudi Arabia. It pays for shipping over sea routes directly into Mombasa. From Mombasa, the oil is piped to Nakuru, still in Kenya. And from Nakuru, a fleet of transport vehicles owned by City Oil, again, all Somali owned, bring them into Kampala, where they are distributed at one of the 5 City Oil branch stations throughout the city. The Ugandans in the room, I'm sure, know City Oil. This is a massive global network. Within this, refugees find jobs in the retail sector. So no, we do not need to explore every aspect of oil production in Dubai, but it's important to know that this same sector stretches from Dubai to Kampala. And City Oil alone employs an estimated 335 Somali refugees.
In 1994, with the beginning of the insecurity in Rwanda, where most of the tailors, Congolese tailors were concentrated, some of them, they started leaving Rwanda to come here to Uganda so that they can continue their jobs. And many of them, with the war of Rwanda, came here. Now, from Rwanda, where they were just migrants, they came here in Uganda as refugees. And that's where they started. And also we have the 1996, the beginning of the war in eastern of Congo. Many of them also came here. And now in 2001, here in Kampala, most of the best tailors were Congolese. And these people, they helped many people, especially even local people, they trained them how to make tailoring, because they came with new fashions, and it was...
The other business where Ethiopian refugees are involved in is called forex business. Forex business, it's where customers exchange local currency with foreign currency. And unlike the hotel business, the Ethiopian refugees who are involved in this forex business are from the second largest ethnic community called Oromo. How it came about, we still didn't, we were not able to identify, but in mid-1990s, there were a couple of Oromos started this business in Kampala. And then they expanded it, and some of them, when they get resettlement opportunity to third countries, they transferred the business. So the ones who got this business, they expanded it, and that's how it started. And most of these forex businesses are located on Kampala Road. Businessmen who operate forex business, they rent premises from Ugandans. That way they generate income to the host community. They pay taxes. They're given the license from Bank of Uganda. They pay taxes. They turn huge, revenue.
To talk about one case study of a private company named Kyangwali Progressive Farmers Association, KPF. This one is a registered company. It's a company registered limited by guarantee. It started in 2010, and it serves over 2,000 refugee farmers within the settlement, but the registration of more farmers is still going on. They deal in sorghum. This is a special type of crop that the Ugandan Nile Breweries, which is a company producing beer, it uses it as the raw material to produce beer that is supplied to many parts of Uganda and consumed also by refugees. So the company is comprised of the founding board, the board of directors, the seed distributors, and the majority of the farmers.
So first of all, I wanted to explore what role technology plays in livelihoods. So we understand that livelihoods is an integral part of the private sector, but on an individual level, what does technology do? Does it help enable those interactions, and what does it mean in people's business models and livelihoods? So I use the role of technology as kind of an entry point to look wider, look into people's livelihoods, if you like. So understanding what skills, knowledge and ideas people have had in their own agency to then lead to this idea of creation of technologies or use and adoption of technologies, or ideas for their business models that involve kind of material and equipment. And also understanding a little bit this time dimension. So where have the ideas come from? What skills have people brought from their home countries? And then what has that meant for their adaptation in their livelihoods? How have they maybe adapted the technologies or adapted their approach to livelihoods over time? And has that influenced this idea of transfer for technology that you mentioned earlier, Charles? So technology, as I mentioned previously, is linked to livelihoods, which is part of wider system and wider markets and networks and social networks as well, especially in Uganda and the settlements, as we've seen earlier. That technology on its own, in its own right, as a piece of material, isn't actually useful for anything, and that the wider networks and interactions, where it's come from, how it's linked to people's livelihoods and the markets, is actually where technology becomes useful and it kind of comes alive and has much more to say for itself than just a kind of piece of equipment that might not be appropriate or fit into a local system. This wider systems create a kind of holistic opportunity for livelihoods to come up, and that often involves technology. CTA, sorry I didn't expand the acronym, but CTA stands for the Community Technology Access Centre, which was initiated by UNHCR in Nakivale refugee settlement. So the Community Technology Access Centre, I'm going to say CTA from now on, is a space in Nakivale which has been set up to primarily for an educational purpose, but also to allow people wider access to communication and skills. So it's a basic computer training centre alongside an internet cafe. So the one in Nakivale is in the same building. It has a committee of refugees from mixed nationalities who run the centre. And the centre is, all of the computers in the centre are powered through solar panels from the roof, a large room of batteries to the CTA. So we spent some time in the CTA finding out what its activities were and what impact it was having on the refugees' livelihoods and how refugees were using the space. This is a picture of the internet cafe side of the CTA. So as you can see, when the power is up, it's really busy. Often the biggest complaint users had actually was that when the connection was down. So when the connection was poor, there'd be no access to the internet. And so during our time at the CTA, we were asking, how do people use the skills they learned in the basic computer training, and how do they use this internet cafe? in that process, we met this young guy in the right-hand corner. He's a young Congolese refugee. He's been in the settlement for 1 to 2 years. When he was in Congo, he enjoyed making movies, music videos, and did a lot of computer editing. He obviously had amazing technical skills and had kind of taught himself. He didn't really have any formal training in kind of specific technologies or technical equipment, but obviously had a very strong passion. So we were talking to him. He had, in this case, there's a picture of him with a computer. He borrows a computer from another refugee, so he pays a daily rental fee for a laptop when he needs it, and he comes to the CTA to use the power, actually. So he uses this CTA for his business, which is, I think Alex mentioned briefly before, his business is doing editing and filmmaking. So he's commissioned by other refugees in the settlement from different nationalities to film weddings, concerts, and other such things, and does photo montages. He uses the internet in the cafe for downloading software. He told us actually his most important use for the internet was Facebook, not for his business, just for fun. And we actually observed lots of people on Facebook, and it seems to be one of the primary uses of the internet in the settlements. So this building here is the radio studio, and the space was given to them by the church. And although it's only been running about a month or so, they'd already said that they had helped a family reunite. They would also kind of transmit information about new arrivals into the settlement, share public health messages and so on. And they also started some income generating activities at the radio.
So in terms of the refugee livelihood survey that we're doing, what you've heard until now is a vast number of really fascinating vignettes, stories of individuals, households, communities, groups, networks, engaging in all kinds of livelihoods innovation. They're stories. To some extent, they are qualitative research stories, and to some extent, they're fascinating and compelling anecdotes. What we want to do next, in order to substantiate and ask to what extent those stories are representative, to what extent they're representative maybe of the top groups of socioeconomic status, or representative of people who don't necessarily have those opportunities, is try and collect more comparative, rigorous data that can support that through more in-depth survey method. So we're shifting slowly from qualitative research to quantitative research. The survey is simply a method for collecting quantitative information. It enables you to look for simplified, in some cases overly simplified, and comparable ways of looking at relationships between different data points. It's a way of looking for correlations between particular variables. So for instance, the correlation that you might find between disability and market access, or gender and livelihood strategy, between particular forms of adaptation and innovation, and other variables such as household structure, for instance. It's also a way of capturing descriptive statistics that can be powerful for advocacy, powerful for policy, and powerful for programming, but also it's a potential source of baseline data. And we're by no means starting from scratch in thinking about livelihood surveys. A lot of people have been doing this for a long time, and UNHCR has also worked on livelihood surveys. And there are certain starting points that UNHCR has used in rural and urban areas. But our qualitative researchers suggest that we can push some of those existing studies in some way and engage in a constructive dialogue with partners like UNHCR that are engaging in livelihood survey work. The Humanitarian Innovation Project is a research project. Its purpose is to do research, but we hope that in conjunction with some of our partners, that research might be able to make some kind of practical difference. It's not so. And there are 3 areas where we hope that together with our partners, we might be able to make some contributions. In terms of challenging the refugee paradigm, we're trying to think through the problem that we began the day with. How is it that we can move thinking about refugees from a view of people as often dependent, passive victims, to people who are agents, who have skills, talents, aspirations,
and can be seen as productive contributing members of their host societies. Secondly, in terms of enabling innovation, is this question that's recurred all the way through, and particularly in what Louise has said, about how do we create an enabling environment that makes the most of opportunities and overcomes challenges and constraints, not just at the very top level, but all the way through people with different degrees of advantage and human capital and network capital. And then finally, this question of informing policy and practice. Are there ways in which we can contribute to the work of our partners, such as UNHCR, but also, for instance, APN, in ways that contribute to their future survey work, or possibly to their programming